Gamergate is widely portrayed by the media as a harassment campaign against women. But that surface narrative hides something deeper. Behind the outrage, behind the headlines, influential political operatives moved quietly, using the chaos to inject ideology into gaming. This scandal wasn't just reactionary, it was orchestrated. A manufactured storm used to establish control, push agendas, and reshape the culture of games for far darker reasons. It began in 2014. A personal blog post by Zoe Quinn's ex-boyfriend exposed a web of personal relationships tied to gaming journalists. What followed would ignite the infamous scandal known as Gamergate. Zoe Quinn became the lightning rod. In the firestorm that erupted, she was subjected to online abuse, doxing, threats of rape, and death. The internet convulsed. But while the world focused on the harassment, few noticed the shadowy figures moving in the background, exploiting the chaos, reshaping the narrative, and seizing control of the conversation. The original story of Gamergate and everything connected to it has been deliberately rewritten, twisted by the media, sanitized by activists, weaponized by political operatives. What began as a call for ethics in gaming journalism was hijacked, transformed into a tool to push a specific agenda into the heart of the games industry and its media. It wasn't justice, it was a takeover. Gamergate is not what the media says it is. It was, and still is, a global uprising of players who stood against a corrupt system, a system that sought to destroy video games, to rewrite them as political tools, a system that wanted to replace passion with propaganda. Gamergate was about gamers fighting back to preserve gaming as an art form, as an escape, as our culture. One of the most prominent voices to rise during the Gamergate era was Anita Sarkeesian, a feminist media critic who launched a YouTube series called Tropes versus Women in Video Games.
Welcome to our multi-part video series exploring the roles and representations of women in video games. This project will examine the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with women in gaming from a systemic, big-picture perspective. This series will include critical analysis of many beloved games and characters, but remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
In her videos, podcasts, and interviews, Anita claimed that video games were deeply sexist, designed primarily to cater to the fantasies of a male audience. She argued that the industry reinforced toxic masculinity, normalized the objectification of women, and needed to be restructured into a more inclusive and progressive space. Her presence became a lightning rod in the culture war, drawing praise from political activists and outrage from gamers who saw her efforts as an attack on gaming itself. Anita is a Canadian-American media critic who began her rise with a YouTube channel called Feminist Frequency in 2009, where she focused on how women were portrayed in pop culture. Her early work was modest. She teamed up with the feminist magazine Bitch in 2011 for a series called Tropes versus Women, targeting cliches in film and TV. It gained some traction, but she remained a niche voice in a small ideological circle. That changed in 2012, when she turned her attention to video games. She launched Tropes versus Women in Video Games, a series that attacked the way female characters were designed and written as sexualized, passive, or objectified prizes for the player. Anita argued that games were reinforcing harmful gender roles, and that even if players enjoyed the games, they had a duty to be critical of their underlying messages. The tone of her videos wasn't extreme, but it was clear. She wasn't a gamer, she didn't grow up with games, and she didn't seem to understand the culture or the craft. But she saw video games as the next battleground for her ideology. To fund the project, she launched a Kickstarter asking for $6,000. It exploded. She pulled in over $160,000 from nearly 7,000 backers. With that attention came criticism, not just because of her ideas, but because many felt she was entering the space not to contribute, but to reshape it according to an outsider agenda. What started as one woman critiquing games quickly spiraled into a movement that would change the course of the industry. Anita Sarkeesian is a grifter. She identified an area, in this case in video games. She will pick something non-relevant and make it a huge deal about it. And then she sought to capitalize on that by becoming the feminist gaming advocate that no one asked for. She crowdfunded for a series of videos about feminism and women in games and got given way over than she wanted. She was meant to do a whole slew of videos, but in the end, only made a few, which a lot of people felt was deceptive, or at least fraudulent. She outright misrepresented games and the narrative of some games just to spin her narrative of how the gaming industry was misogynistic. She claimed to be an avid gamer, but a video surfaced where she was giving a talk about a year prior to her starting up Feminist Frequency, where she outright admitted on video that she didn't really play games. She saw an avenue to make money. For the briefest of times, she did, but quite quickly, she was seen as a poisonous influence, and the video game industry doesn't pay her any mind anymore. She is nothing but a leech. She brings nothing positive to gaming whatsoever.
Turns out that there are a bunch of male gamers out there who were, shall we say, not too excited about this project. Now, I'm a pop culture critic, I am a feminist, and I'm a woman. And I'm all of these things openly on the internet. So I'm no stranger to some level of sexist backlash. I've sadly gotten used to sexist slurs and sexist insults, usually involving kitchens and sandwiches. But what happened this time was a little bit different. I found myself the target of a massive online hate campaign. Now, the next couple of slides represent just a tiny fraction of the harassment I received, and they come with a very large trigger warning. All of my social media sites were flooded with threats of rape, violence, sexual assault, death, and you'll notice that these threats and comments were all specifically targeting my gender. The Wikipedia article about me was vandalized with sexism, racism, and pornographic images. There was a campaign to report all of my social media accounts, including my Kickstarter, my YouTube, my Twitter, and they would report them as fraud, as spam, even as terrorism, in an effort to get them suspended. They attempted to knock my website offline, hack into my email and other accounts. They attempted to collect and distribute my personal information, including my home address and phone number. There were images made, pornographic images made in my likeness being raped by video game characters and sent to me again and again. There was even a game made where players were invited to beat the bitch up, in which, upon clicking on the screen, an image of me would become increasingly battered and bruised. You get the point, we'll move on. What's even more disturbing, if that's even possible, than this overt display of misogyny on a grand scale, is that the perpetrators openly referred to this harassment campaign and their abuse as a game. They referred to their abuse as a game. So, in their minds, they concocted this grand fiction in which they're the heroic players of a massively multiplayer online game working together to take down an enemy. And apparently they casted me in the role of the villain. And what was my big diabolical master plan? To make a series of videos on YouTube about women's representations in games. Yeah. So, if they think of their abuse as a fun game, then let's examine this. Who are the players? Well, often when we talk about online harassment, we think of teenage boys in their parents' basements. And while I was attacked by some teenage boys, I was also attacked by thousands of grown men. And this isn't entirely surprising considering the average age of the male gamer in the US is about 30. Where is this game played? Well, the perpetrators turned the entire internet into a battlefield. So in my case, they came after everything and anything that I possibly had ever had online. They also have a home base where they coordinate their raids and work together and communicate. And this usually takes place on largely unmoderated, largely anonymous message boards and forums. And these are places with no real mechanisms for accountability. So what is the goal? Well, the immediate explicit goal is to stop the villain and save video games from me and my crazy feminist schemes. And they tried to do this by silencing and discrediting me and my project. But the larger implicit goal here is that they're actually trying to maintain the status quo of video games as a male-dominated space, and all of the privileges and entitlements that come with an unquestioned boys' club.
She works from the standpoint that media directly affects people's attitudes and opinions in culture, as well as their actions in real life. This isn't necessarily wrong per se, but the evidence supporting it, what little exists, is tenuous at best. Her commentary and criticisms are based on heavy regulation and limiting creativity, rather than individual choice and liberty, all of which is based on what she arbitrarily sees fit. As someone who highly values subjectivity and artistic expression, I personally find this to be extremely insulting. Her main political and philosophical stance is that the issues affecting people today are a result of culture and society gone wrong, and therefore must be changed, transformed, and/or controlled in order to do moral good. This is not only a very controversial standpoint that relies on a very strict and arbitrary set of ethics, but a slippery slope into becoming a radical, authoritarian ideology. She is vehemently opposed to pornography, sex work, and portraying female sexuality in an overt or explicit manner. In a society that has become more accepting and tolerant of the sex industry and personal liberty in general, her views on such have become very similar to notorious radical sex-negative feminists of the past, like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon. She's known to be very hypocritical. For example, she complained and was made famous by the beat-up Anita Sarkeesian game, yet published and condoned a fan fiction of her brutally murdering Randy Pitchford. Spider-Man recruits the help of Anita Sarkeesian to stop Randy Pitchford and the Green Goblin from resurrecting Duke Nukem. She constantly overanalyzes things and tries to look for sexism, racism, homophobia, misogyny, etc. On top of that, she moves the goalpost whenever her original complaint has been satisfied in some way. An effective critique is, when you compare something to a set of standards, observe what does and does not work, and offer a better solution that's in the best interest of everyone, not looking for problems to complain about. The research and evidence she presents backing up her positions are cherry-picked at best, and either non-existent or downright dishonest at worst. Even by middle school standards, this is unacceptable and downright embarrassing on pretty much every academic level. For a professional critic, this is just disgraceful.
I'm Anita Sarkeesian, as you already know, apparently. So I run an educational nonprofit organization called Feminist Frequency, and as part of that project, I host an ongoing series of long-form video essays on YouTube analyzing the representations of women in popular video games. Now, video games are kind of a big deal these days. Gaming is a multi-billion-dollar industry with an enormous impact on our larger cultural landscape. What you may not know is that gaming and gaming communities are currently undergoing a massive paradigm shift. The cultural, political, and economic structures of the medium are in the process of fundamentally transforming. While women have always played and made games, for several decades the industry catered almost exclusively to a straight, white, male demographic. This is no longer the case. The new reality is that gaming is becoming a more diverse and inclusive environment for everyone. That metamorphosis is happening slowly and sometimes painfully, but it's happening. This is great news. However, I'm here today to share a little bit about the phenomenon of very vocal, aggressive, mostly male gamers who are unwilling or unable to accept this new reality. Their reactionary response can only be described as a massive and terrifying assault directed at the female fans, developers, and critics who feel they are destroying games. I imagine they feel something like this.
Where the video games? I can't breathe.
So, as some of you may already know, my video series exploring topics such as the damsel in distress has been met with critical acclaim and positive responses from gamers and developers alike. But it has also been accompanied by a fair amount of anger. That's me with, you can't see because it's so bright in here, but I have like glowing red eyes. In fact, over the last 2 years, I've been made into something of a folk demon by some very angry men, especially those that hang out on certain parts of Reddit and 4chan. They have figuratively and literally concluded that I'm some kind of Disney villain who is personally responsible for the ongoing transformation of the gaming industry. Of course, I'm definitely not in charge of this cultural shift. No one person is. But in their delusion, they've decided to believe that if they take me out, all will return to normal. So for the last 2 years, they have viciously and aggressively come after me by any means necessary. These next couple of slides are pretty graphic. I've been attacked with a constant torrent of grotesque misogynist harassment, everything from gendered hate speech to weaponized pornography, where they superimpose my face on pornographic images and then spam me with them, to bomb threats, rape threats, and death threats directed at me and my family and my colleagues. And there are ongoing investigations taking place for the worst of these crimes. So those are pretty clear and obvious forms of misogyny. Today, however, I'd like to talk to you about some of the more subtle forms of sexism that are not as obviously recognizable as the overt threats and slurs we saw a moment ago. Specifically, I'd like to focus on two strategies that these harassers have used in defaming me and my project: online impersonation and spreading conspiracy theories. I'm going to deconstruct my own experience to illustrate how this works in practice, but it's certainly not unique to me. The tactics of defamation are used as weapons to try and undermine the work and credibility of women in gaming and geek and tech-oriented subcultures. And for many women, including myself, slander and libel are the background radiation of our daily lives on the internet. So, the first, impersonation. Impersonation is a favored tactic employed to try and discredit women, especially feminists, who are often depicted as evil, man-hating feminazis. Because my work is straightforward, textual analysis delivered in a calm, analytical tone, and because I don't resemble that caricature, detractors often fabricate false quotes out of thin air in order to stereotype me as a more familiar villain. The creating of fake social media accounts on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook are common practice. The impersonation accounts steal and use my logos, my image, and my name to then post inflammatory or provocative statements. Let's look at a few examples. This very poorly photoshopped fake tweet was trying to imply that somehow I embezzled money from my Kickstarter funds for personal gain. This image was featured on Reddit, I think about a year ago, and quickly went viral, partially because it fits in nicely within this pre-existing sexist notion about women stealing from hardworking men in order to buy expensive shoes. I'm still getting hate mail about this a year later. Okay, so another example is a couple years ago I gave a talk at DICE, the game studio in Sweden that's responsible for the Battlefield series, as well as one of my favorite games, Mirror's Edge. Any fans, Mirror's Edge? Yeah. This was a private event for employees only. However, that did not stop some industrious harassers from creating and leaking a fake report about what I supposedly said. The gist of it is a completely made-up quote saying that Mirror's Edge is misogynist because the control scheme is too hard for female gamers. The ironic thing here is that not only did I never say that, but I actually have no problem with the game's control schemes, and apparently they do. Like the fake shoes tweet, this one has been widely distributed and accepted as fact in many corners of the internet. Again, even though it comes from 4chan, I receive regular hate mail about this every day. Or not every day, but often. Okay, here are two more ridiculous fake quotes. One is decrying the much-beloved gaming company Valve. I don't know who would believe this is true because that is so much more than 140 characters. Just saying. The other is stating that I believe murder is somehow not that bad, combined with a photo they stole from my personal Flickr account. So these are just a few examples, but what's important to understand is how quickly they become part of what is sometimes referred to as an information cascade. Information cascades occur when people rapidly repeat or share information from others without first verifying its validity. So falsehoods about me are initially pushed by detractors who use them to spam 4chan and Reddit as a way of provoking rage and rallying more people to join the crusade against me. As the disinformation spreads through social media, it takes on a life of its own. It's bouncing from Twitter to Facebook to Tumblr to YouTube and back again. Once the cascade reaches a critical mass, it no longer matters what the facts are, it becomes a viral meme. These hoaxes work to reinforce that folk demon narrative about me, right? The one that I mentioned earlier, because it's turning me into the embodiment of the most extreme, irrational stereotype of feminism possible. The fake quotes also gain traction in the information cascade because they play on and help rationalize pre-existing paranoid fears about feminist interlopers and women invading video games. All of this becomes a part of the mythological canon of my villainy, supposedly proving that I really am as bad as they think, which then serves as justification for further and more extreme forms of harassment. Given the prevalence of these impersonation-style hoaxes, it might not come as a surprise for you to learn that there are also a number of internet conspiracy theories about me and my work floating around out there. Now, when I say conspiracy theories, I'm talking full-on tinfoil hat, chemtrails, 9/11, truthers, birthers type conspiracy theories. It's the kind of delusional belief subscribed to by those who are unable or unwilling to accept a changing reality.
She profits off of being a victim, specifically online harassment, and treats it as a uniquely gendered issue instead of working to combat it, acknowledging how other demographics are affected, or accepting it as a consequence of public exposure and discourse. She presents herself as an authority who speaks for women and minorities, as well as those seeking to be in the gaming culture, which is already a very diverse and generally accepting community. She spreads misleading and thoroughly debunked statistics. She treats any and all criticisms towards her as harassment and hate speech, and blocks anyone who disagrees with her. To date, she has never entered a serious public debate or discussion against those with opposing views, or anyone to challenge her stances. She tried to derail a fundraiser, trying to help kids in Africa in order to libel it as a harassment strategy against her Ordinary Women series fundraiser. Feminist Frequency's Ordinary Women campaign keeps kicking ass despite harassment. In my opinion, this is one of, if not the most egregious and abhorrent actions of someone who claims to stand for women and social justice. She raised nearly $160,000 on Kickstarter for her Tropes versus Women in Video Games series to create a horribly researched, poorly argued, inconsistent, and outright dishonest video series that used footage from Let's Play channels on YouTube without giving them any credit whatsoever. During the Women Online discussion panel at VidCon 2017, she publicly insulted and defamed an audience member and vocal critic of her work, Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, while he just sat there and listened. Not only did this violate VidCon's harassment policy of the convention, she furthermore wrote a libelous blog on her website about the event and defamed him in an interview. All of this resulted in Carl getting endless harassment on Twitter and having his Patreon temporarily suspended, affecting his primary source of financial income. This was so serious that, if he wanted to, he could have sued her for defamation of character, especially if the well-being and safety of himself and his family were threatened as a result.
She sounds like a total bigot when she's talking about anything.
A bigot?
Yeah.
How so?
Because she'll just say, well, this is men. I mean, the whole premise of feminism is that men are oppressing women. And if men aren't oppressing women, then feminism has no argument. You have the right to hate your oppressor. It's right to do this. Talking about like a specific sphere of academic feminists, in her case, sex negative.
What?
Yeah, they don't like objectification. But Anita Sarkeesian stepped up and was like, you know what? It's wrong to look at these tits. And everyone was like, but she's wearing a really tight top for a reason, and she's not real.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, Anita Sarkeesian comes from a school of sex negative feminism, and she decided that she would take advantage of all this. Now, in 2010, there was a video, I think it was 2010, that the video was recorded in black and white of her in a university giving a speech where she says, I'm not a gamer. I had to learn a lot about gaming to get into all this. And then come 2012, I mean, that video wasn't released until after she did her Tropes versus Women in Gaming Kickstarter. May 2012, she starts this Kickstarter, and within the first few days, she starts posting updates on that. I'm being harassed. It's like, well, yeah, people generally react negatively to phenomenal bigots on the internet. They don't like it. People don't like it. I mean, like when you say men are oppressing women, and everything she says is a variant of men are oppressing women. You know, it's the male gaze is highly oppressive to women. Toxic masculinity is highly oppressive to women. So, okay, when can men legitimately look at women, Anita? No answer. What is non-toxic masculinity? There's no such thing. So what you're saying is masculinity and men checking out chicks is just bad, and you hate it, and the men are all bad for doing this, and they're oppressing the women when they're doing this. So I went to VidCon recently, and
VidCon?
Yeah.
What is that?
YouTube convention that's in Anaheim. So Anita Sarkeesian, she spots me sitting in the audience, and then she starts freaking out.
Freaking out?
Yeah, she starts saying things like, there's a constant harasser of mine, calling me, she called me a shithead, she called me a garbage human.
A garbage human?
I did nothing to her. I didn't say a word. I just sat in the audience while she's there cussing me out on the stage. I mean, this now...
So she's on the stage with a microphone and
Yes.
she's calling you a shithead and a garbage human. And this was because you've made videos about her? Is that what it is?
This is because I've made videos debunking her points. And she's under the impression that all of my videos are about her. Yeah.
So how are you harassing? Like what was
not.
the?
And that's the thing.
What's the worst thing you've ever said about her?
That she's wrong.
That's it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you will never find someone who says she's a good critic. She's a terrible critic, and she always has been. It's always been rightly pointed out to her that she's cherry-picked every time. No one stands by her work. She's become like a symbol of feminism because of all the harassment she's received. Basically, her work sucks. It's just bad work. I mean, nobody in the video game industry would turn around and say, you know what, that's great criticism, Anita. Only like the progressive press. But yeah,
People are so funny with their need to be a victim.
It
validates them.
Yeah, it really does. When you don't have an argument, you need to be a victim.
Well, does she expect that
Well,
somehow
let
or another
me-
she's going to be able to put these points out and not have anybody dispute these points?
Well, I'm guessing so. And she always conflates all criticism with harassment. She's never addressed a critic before.
Oh, okay.
And the first time she addresses a critic, it's me, and she's calling me names.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like, well, that's not
a
very
good
mature.
look.
Yeah, it's not very good.
It's not a good look.
She says that I'm responsible for all of the harassment. Now,
All of it.
Well, at least
It's definitely not hers. It's not her fault.
No,
If you
it's
have a
everyone
controversial
else's fault.
opinion and someone disputes it, that person who disputes it is
Yeah.
responsible for all the harassment.
Yeah, well, basically, I've always said right from the get-go, don't ever contact them. Don't ever contact them because, for a start, I mean, they don't want to listen. She's not interested in hearing your fucking opinion, so don't
Right.
bother. She's got nothing but contempt for you. But secondly, don't send her harassment because A, it's immoral, and B, she's got the victim card. That gives her money. When
Right.
when you send her a message saying, "Hey, Anita, I think you're a bitch," she goes cha-ching, and then she runs off to the next interview. She gets paid. I mean, some of her speeches at university, she's been paid $20,000 a speech.
That's hilarious.
I'm not joking, right? And it's just, and for her to go, the internet's being mean to me. Well, maybe if you weren't being a bigot online, they wouldn't be. Apart from the fact that I've never harassed her, and if there was any evidence that I'd harassed her, it'd be all over the internet right now. I mean, it would be nothing but Twitter.
course, yeah.
Because they're trying to paint me as a harasser when I'm actually just a critic of hers, and I've always been completely against it. But what really annoys me is that her Kickstarter, if you look at it now, if you go to it, you can pull it up now, and you can see tropes versus women, and she's got a spiel, and then, oh, the terrible messages, the harassment. That was in May 2012. I didn't make a video on YouTube until July 2013. This has been happening to her whole career. It's nothing to do with me. It's to do with her. It's because she's a dick. And everyone can see it.
Are you
And
allowed to
everyone's
call a
sick
girl
of
a
it.
dick like you call a guy a pussy?
Yeah. I'm calling her a dick. I don't care. You're a dick, Anita. Everyone knows you're a dick.
He looked into the camera.
Do you know?
That's
do you know
harassment.
Do you want to know something? I've spoken to a lot of interesting people recently since I've been here.
Yeah.
A lot of people who know you personally, Anita, and they say everyone hates you because you're a dick.
Oh, this is getting mean.
I'm bewildered at her. I listened to it the other day, and I was just like, wow, I had no idea what was going on. And I was just like, look, Anita, I think you're just wrong on this. I don't think you understand. Like there is a lot to this that you've left out. I should have said cherry picked, but and that's something that's dogged her whole career because that's all she's ever done. Her criticism's terrible, and everyone knows it. Nobody likes her because she's a divisive bitch, and all she does is play the victim. She's got nothing. She has nothing, and all she does is lie.
Well, let's not talk about her specifically because
Well-
we're kind of beating her down here. But
Well, the thing is, it's hard to think of anything genuinely good about her. That's the problem.
let's not talk about her.
She is nowhere near as progressive as she thinks she is. Her arguments tend to be very intellectually dishonest, and she appears to come from a perspective that is very narrow, rigid, and technocratic, which simply doesn't resonate with a lot of people. In many ways, Anita comes across as one of those cultural elites who is completely out of touch with the rest of society, a perception made even worse by Anita not engaging with her critics. She said she was going to produce a certain number of videos, 12 possibly, and only completed 3 or 4. She scammed her audience and only released another 2 videos from that series, when she was trying to scam people again by asking for more money for another series she will likely never complete. As for the gamers who responded negatively, they have every right to be angry. She is painting them as a misogynistic boys-only club who buy games purely to see digital women in bikini. And she doesn't even have the decency to play the games herself. She just steals the footage. She publicly bullied someone at a panel who was merely there to listen. She gave Breath of the Wild on the character of Zelda herself a false accusation in her review. And half the time, she does nothing but play victimhood. She's a self-declared critic. She's the type that'll latch onto something popular. She represents gaming women badly and makes feminism sound like communism. She thinks no one should have a choice to not follow feminism because of consequence. She also insults women for disagreeing. Any threats she's gotten have not been proven because they can't trace them, or it was stupid trolls. Without the media coverage and agenda, she'd be just another YouTube. She just tries too hard to be relevant to gamers in general, whether they're fans or critics. In her Mass Effect series, she complained that man and woman had the same choices in the game. Why is that a problem if we are aiming for equality? Does your gender influence your decision-making capability? Videos such as that one highlights that she is mostly an enemy of the medium and an opportunist, as opposed to being a voice for feminism. And as for the online harassment, there is obviously no place for the perpetrators anywhere in the modern world. Even though a recent study indicated that men were the most targeted demographic online with threats, and especially death threats, whereas women were mostly targeted with sexual harassment. Not that either is good, but reflective of the space itself, as opposed to it being a war on women. Anita Sarkeesian is a stage show, prancing around on stage with a series of statements that don't need to be either qualified or verified. She offers nothing to the conversation between the sexes and remains quite destructive to both feminism and any authority that bothers to give her credence. She promotes herself as a gamer with a pithy, poor knowledge representation of her chosen topic, and then fails to respond to accurate and researched evaluation of her topics. She disabled comments, disabled ratings, dismissed all criticism as harassment, uses incredibly cherry-picked data and bogus statements, basically calls all gamers sexist, went to both Twitter and the UN to shut up opinions she didn't like. If she was parading as a scientist, she would be kicked off every university campus for promoting quackery. But she is a feminist. Because she says so, and that obviously means that despite her continuing inaccurate promotions and statistics, we should give her extended credibility. And apparently money to promote new, inaccurate projects, despite her inability to finish her last assignment. Miss Andrew doesn't need to come into it. She does the subject of feminism a disservice by even being associated with it. This is only the beginning of a much larger story. What you've seen so far is just the second chapter in a long and complex battle that reshaped the gaming world. But the events that followed, from the media backlash to the rise of new voices pushing back, deserve their own deep dive. This was just the first whisper in the dark. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.